Today marks the quiet passing of four American lives whose voices shaped different corners of culture, yet shared the same human pursuit, expression, meaning, and connection. From the laughter-filled rooms of stand-up comedy to the disciplined stages of Broadway, from Hollywood's golden age to the open, searching landscapes of modern jazz, each journey left a lasting echo. These were not lives measured only by fame, but by influence, by the way they made others feel, think, and listen. Time moves forward without pause, yet moments like this ask for reflection. This hour is not about endings, but remembrance. A tribute to talent, courage, restraint, and freedom. For legends. For stories. One final moment to honor what remains after the applause fades. The news was confirmed quietly, late in the day, as winter settled over New York and Los Angeles alike. John Mulrooney, a comedian who spent his life turning everyday struggle into shared laughter, passed away on December 29, 2025. He was 67 years old. There were no flashing headlines, no loud announcements. Just a growing stillness among those who knew his voice, his timing, and the work he put into every laugh. John Mulrooney was born on August 27, 1958, and raised in Brooklyn, New York. He grew up in working-class neighborhoods where humor was not a luxury, but a tool for survival. Life moved fast, money was tight, and people learned early how to read a room. Those early lessons would later shape his comedy. He did not rely on shock or excess. He relied on truth, delivered with rhythm and care. In 1979, Mulrooney stepped onto the stage at Pip's Comedy Club in Sheepshead Bay. The New York comedy scene at the time was raw and competitive. Comics fought for minutes, not fame. Every set was a test. Mulrooney stood out not because he was loud, but because he was observant. He watched people. He listened. His jokes felt lived in, shaped by real streets and real conversations. As he moved through clubs like Catch a Rising Star, the Comic Strip, the Improv, and Dangerfields, his reputation grew slowly but steadily. Fellow comedians noticed his discipline. He showed up prepared. He respected the craft. One comic later recalled, John treated comedy like a job, not a gamble. He believed laughter had to be earned. That belief stayed with him throughout his career. The early 1980s brought a new chapter. Mulrooney transitioned into television on a show called Comedy Tonight. It was more than a performance role. He became deeply involved behind the scenes, writing and producing content with the same care he brought to the stage. Over time, he contributed to 165 episodes. For him, the work mattered as much as the spotlight. During this period, Mulrooney made 13 stand-up appearances on television. Each one was polished, controlled, and honest. He never rushed a punchline. He trusted silence. Audiences responded to that calm confidence. His humor did not chase trends. It reflected people back to themselves. In a moment that could have ended momentum, Mulrooney competed on Star Search and lost. On paper, it was a setback. In reality, it became a turning point. Rather than walking away, he was hired by the program. He wrote comedy. He warmed up audiences. He learned how television worked from the inside. One producer later said, John didn't sulk. He stayed curious. That's why people kept hiring him. That ability to adapt defined his career. When he relocated to Los Angeles, he did not arrive as a star. He arrived as a worker. He became a regular at the Improvisation, the world-famous Comedy Store, and the Laugh Factory. Night after night, he refined his voice. He shared stages with rising names and fading ones. Fame came and went around him, but Mulrooney stayed consistent. In Los Angeles, his role as a craftsman became even clearer. He was not chasing headlines or viral moments. He was building sets, shaping jokes, and supporting rooms. Younger comics often spoke of his generosity. One remembered, "John never tried to outshine anyone. He wanted the room to succeed." That mindset made him respected, even when he was not in the spotlight. Mulrooney also worked as an actor and writer, contributing to television and comedy projects with the same quiet professionalism. He understood that comedy was not just performance. It was structure, timing, and trust. Trust between the performer and the audience. Trust that laughter could arrive without force. As the years passed, Mulrooney's presence remained steady. He did not burn out fast or disappear suddenly. He built a long, working life in entertainment, one show at a time. His comedy aged with him. It grew calmer, sharper, and more reflective. He spoke about work, aging, and daily frustrations with a tone that felt familiar rather than bitter. When news of his passing spread, reactions were immediate but subdued. There was sadness, but also gratitude. Fellow comedians shared memories online. One post read, "John Mulrooney was the kind of comic who made comedy feel honest again. No noise. Just truth." Another wrote, "He taught me that showing up matters more than blowing up." His death on December 29, 2025, marked the end of a working life devoted to making rooms feel lighter. There were no scandals attached to his name. No loud controversies. Just decades of effort, jokes written late at night, and stages walked quietly after applause faded. For those who worked with him, Mulrooney represented a version of comedy that is often overlooked. Comedy as labor. Comedy as service. Comedy as something built, not chased. He believed laughter was not an escape from life, but a way to endure it together. In interviews over the years, Mulrooney rarely spoke about legacy. He spoke about craft. About getting better. About respecting the audience. That humility became part of his influence. He showed that success did not always mean fame. Sometimes it meant longevity. Sometimes it meant being trusted. As one longtime club owner said after his passing, "John was never late, never careless, and never cruel." In comedy, that's rare. Those words echoed across the community he helped shape. Today, his stages remain. The clubs are still open. New voices take the microphone. But a certain steadiness is gone. A rhythm shaped by Brooklyn streets and decades of quiet work has faded into memory. John Mulrooney leaves behind not just jokes, but an example. An example of persistence without bitterness. Of humor without cruelty. Of a life spent finding truth through laughter. And in that truth, his voice continues. Not loud. Not flashy. But steady, human, and remembered. The news arrived quietly, carried through messages and shared posts, confirming a loss felt deeply within the theater community. Bret Hanna-Shuford passed away on January 3, 2026, in Orlando, Florida. He was 46 years old. There were no loud announcements, only a soft pause among those who had worked beside him, learned from him, and felt seen because of him. Bret Hanna-Shuford was born in 1979 in Beaumont, Texas. From an early age, he showed a love for performance, not as spectacle, but as discipline. He was drawn to structure, rehearsal, and the shared effort of storytelling. Those values stayed with him as he trained in classical theater and prepared for a life shaped by craft. When he arrived in New York, theater became his true classroom. He learned the demands of ensemble work, where no role stands alone. Long rehearsals, quiet notes, and trust between cast members defined his early years. Friends recall that he listened more than he spoke. One fellow actor later said, "Bret believed the work mattered more than the attention." His career unfolded steadily across stage, television, and film. In 2013, he appeared in The Wolf of Wall Street, placing him briefly within mainstream cinema. Yet even then, he treated the moment with balance. It was never described as a destination, only part of a larger journey. As one colleague shared online, he never chased the spotlight. He carried it carefully when it found him. Offstage, Bret's influence grew in quieter but lasting ways. He became a mentor to younger performers, especially those finding their place within theater's demanding world. He offered guidance without ego, advice without judgment. Many later spoke of small conversations that stayed with them long after the curtain fell. One of his most meaningful contributions came through the co-founding of Broadway Husbands. What began as a digital platform became something deeper. It was a space where LGBTQ+ artists could share life beyond the stage, blending tradition with modern expression. The project celebrated love, partnership, and visibility, without forcing performance. A follower once wrote, "Broadway Husbands made room for joy without fear." Through this work, Bret helped bridge generations. He respected theater's history while welcoming new voices and formats. His presence reminded others that identity and artistry do not compete. They can exist together, honestly and without apology. When news of his passing spread, the response was immediate but restrained. Tributes focused not on roles, but on character. One message read, "Bret made people feel safe to be themselves." Another shared, "He didn't just act on stage. He showed us how to live with care." His death on January 3, 2026, is addressed with dignity, without speculation or intrusion. What remains is not a question of how he left, but how he lived. His life reflected the quiet complexity of artists who move between visibility and vulnerability. He understood that strength does not always announce itself. In the days following, theaters continued their schedules. Lights rose. Lines were spoken. Yet something subtle had shifted. A presence shaped by kindness, patience, and purpose was no longer in the room. Still, its influence lingered. Bret Hanna-Shuford's legacy is not measured by marquee roles alone. It lives in the spaces he helped create. In conversations made easier. In stages made more welcoming. In lives encouraged to stand freely. As one friend wrote simply, "He showed us that being seen starts with seeing others." And in that reflection, Bret Hanna-Shuford remains, steady, generous, and remembered. The confirmation came softly, carried through quiet headlines and shared remembrances across the film world. Eva Marie Saint passed away in January 2026, closing a chapter that spanned nearly a century of American cinema. She was 101 years old. Her departure did not feel sudden, but it felt significant, like the final page of a long and carefully written story. Eva Marie Saint was born in 1924, at a time when Hollywood was still shaping its identity. Before the bright lights of film, she worked in radio and live television, learning control, timing, and restraint. These early years taught her how to do more with less. She understood that silence could speak, and stillness could hold power. Her film debut in On the Waterfront changed everything. Cast alongside Marlon Brando, she delivered a performance marked by honesty and quiet strength. It earned her an Academy Award, early and unexpected. Yet even then, she did not rush toward fame. Those who worked with her noticed her balance. One critic later wrote, "She acted as if truth mattered more than attention." Rather than chase constant exposure, Saint chose her roles carefully. She worked with Alfred Hitchcock in North by Northwest, bringing intelligence and emotional clarity to a world of suspense. Their collaboration was built on trust. Hitchcock once described her as precise, calm, and deeply thoughtful, a rare presence in an industry driven by excess. Throughout her career, Eva Marie Saint became known for restraint. She did not overplay emotion. She allowed moments to breathe. Her acting felt natural at a time when performance was often theatrical. Younger actors would later point to her work as an example of how simplicity could carry depth. As Hollywood changed, she adapted without losing herself. She moved between film, television, and stage, always with intention. Fame never defined her choices. Privacy mattered. She lived much of her later life away from constant attention, letting the work speak in her place. When news of her passing spread, tributes focused less on awards and more on presence. One filmmaker shared, Eva Marie Saint showed that grace could be powerful. Another wrote online, she made strength look gentle, and that stayed with audiences for decades. Her death in January 2026 was not framed as loss alone, but as the closing of a living archive. She was one of the last direct connections to Hollywood's golden age, a time now remembered mostly through black and white images and preserved reels. With her passing, that era felt more distant, yet more clearly defined. Eva Marie Saint's influence extended beyond any single role. She helped shape a quieter style of acting, one rooted in realism and respect for the audience. She trusted viewers to feel what was not spoken. That trust became her signature. In her later years, she remained a figure of dignity. She did not seek attention, but admiration followed her quietly. Her long life stood as proof that a career could be built on patience, integrity, and choice. As one admirer wrote after her passing, she never demanded the spotlight. It followed her anyway. That simple reflection captured her legacy. Eva Marie Saint leaves behind more than performances. She leaves behind a lesson. That grace is not spectacle. It is endurance. A steady presence that holds its ground while the world changes around it. And long after the screen goes dark, that presence remains, calm, composed, and unforgettable. The news was confirmed in a quiet moment, shared first among musicians and listeners who understood the weight of the name. Sonny Rollins passed away in January 2026, marking the end of a life that reshaped the sound and spirit of modern jazz. He was more than a master of the saxophone. He was a thinker, a seeker, and a voice of freedom. Walter Theodore Rollins was born in 1930 and raised in Harlem, where music filled the streets and apartments alike. Jazz was not distant or rare. It was part of daily life. From an early age, he listened closely, learning not only notes, but feeling. Those early sounds shaped a mind that would later question rules instead of following them. As a young musician, Rollins moved quickly into the center of the jazz world. He played with artists who were already changing history, yet he never disappeared into their shadows. His tone was bold, but thoughtful. His phrasing felt alive, always searching. Albums like Saxophone Colossus announced a new voice, one that treated improvisation as conversation rather than display. His compositions, including St. Thomas and Olio, became standards, not because they were simple, but because they were open. They invited risk. They welcomed space. One fellow musician later said, "Sonny didn't just play songs. He opened doors and let others walk through." At the height of his fame, when applause was loud and constant, Rollins made a choice that confused many. He stepped away from public performance. There were no tours. No recordings. Instead, there was silence and discipline. He practiced alone, often for hours, believing there was more to learn. It was not retreat. It was commitment. Years later, Rollins spoke about that time with clarity. He believed growth required honesty. A fan once shared online, "He taught us that stepping back can be an act of courage." That belief would become central to his legacy. When he returned to the stage, his music had changed. It breathed differently. There was more space, more patience. He continued to experiment, never repeating himself for comfort. Each performance felt like a question rather than an answer. Audiences listened closely, sensing that something deeper was being shared. Rollins continued to perform and record for decades, always guided by curiosity. He refused to freeze himself in one era. Even as jazz styles shifted, his approach remained open. In 2014, he officially retired from performing, not as an ending, but as a natural pause in a long conversation. When news of his death in January 2026 spread, tributes came from across the world. Musicians, critics, and listeners spoke with the same tone of respect. One message read, "Sonny Rollins showed us how to be brave with sound." Another said, "He proved that silence can be part of the music." His life is best understood as a complete arc. There was no decline, only movement. From early brilliance to chosen solitude, from return to reflection, each phase carried intention. He believed that freedom was not given by applause, but earned through discipline and honesty. Sonny Rollins changed jazz by trusting space. He allowed pauses to speak. He treated risk as necessary, not dangerous. His music asked listeners to lean in, to stay present, and to accept uncertainty. That philosophy reached beyond music and into life itself. As one longtime admirer wrote after his passing, he didn't demand attention. He invited courage. Those words capture the heart of his impact. Today, his recordings remain. His ideas continue to guide new generations. In every bold phrase and quiet pause, his spirit endures. Sonny Rollins leaves behind a sound shaped by freedom. A reminder that music, like life, becomes richer when there is room to breathe.